Hi everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the Facebook course. This week we're going to be talking about audience management. So just a brief introduction to the Audience Manager. So Facebook Audience Manager is the built-in tool that allows you to create, build and explore audiences that you can leverage to target potential customers on Facebook. So this is a built-in tool on the platform where you can customize and create multiple different audience types. I think one of the big mistakes that people often make is they start inputting or creating their audiences during the campaign setup, and we'll talk about that as well. But the audience manager actually allows you to do this all separately to your ad creation process. So you can select your audiences essentially during the ad setup process to make things a little bit easier for you. So before you get started, you really want to make sure that because of the iOS changes that you have everything done from the first 2 sessions that we spoke about in terms of having your tracking set up, your domain verified and all of that. You want to make sure that your tracking is certainly set up because that directly correlates with having effective audiences. So essentially your tracking can be in place in order to measure your return on ad spend effectively, but also it can be in place so that you can target people effectively. The pixel is always learning about your audience, and you want it to have as much information as possible about your users and what actions they are taking so they can find more people that are going to take that action also. You want to look at every potential data point you have in order to create audiences. You want to think about audiences you want to exclude just as much as audiences you want to include in your campaigns. And this is particularly important for retail, B2B businesses. If someone has hit the thank you page in your B2B business, potentially they don't need to go into that funnel again. If you're in retail, potentially you want to have an exclusion of people who've purchased in the last 14 days because you want to give them a chance to receive their item before they purchase again. So you really want to think about exclusions just as much as inclusions when it comes to your audience, and that will save you in terms of budget as well. And you also want to think about how your audiences are going to be segmented. So if you have multiple different audiences that you want to target, and how are you going to segment them out? Are you going to exclude them from each other? This will give you the opportunity to think about this as well when you're working through this checklist. The next thing that you need to know about really is the audience changes due to iOS 14.5. So this is a screen grab from an ad account that I monitor, where you can see here review audiences that have decreased in size. So as you set up campaigns, as you look at different ad sets, as you look at your different audiences, you may receive this notification that your audiences have decreased in size. And that is because people have opted out of being tracked. And as I mentioned previously, the tracking and the targeting are correlated in the sense that it's both the pixel that is picking up on this data that Facebook is using to track, monitor, and analyze your customers or the people you are targeting. So your audiences may decrease in size, and this is particularly around your website visitors and things like that. I will show you in a few minutes the exact types of audiences that are impacted and the exact audiences that are not impacted. So there's multiple types of audiences. Some are impacted more frequently when it's your own data, and then in vice versa, Facebook has on-platform data that you can use that is not impacted by these changes. So there is a small difference there, but in here in resources, where in your resource center, where we mentioned in week 1 and 2 as well, this is where you will find these little notifications if your audience sizes have decreased. And you want to keep an eye on those audience sizes, which you can do in Audience Manager as well. I'll show you where to find that, just to make sure that if, say for example, your website visitors analytics is showing X amount of new users and then your Facebook audience is significantly smaller, you want to keep an eye on those kind of things as well to assess just how much they have decreased in size. Because if they haven't decreased that much, there's still potentially an effective audience for you. But if they're heavily impacted, you may need to make adjustments to your campaigns accordingly. So you always want to start in Audience Manager. So over here on the left, you can see here, once you click these 9 dots, sometimes it's 3 lines. I can see this change in multiple different accounts. And what you will see here is audiences. Sometimes it's here, sometimes it's in here, and sometimes it's in the list below. Every ad account seems to be slightly different, but no matter what ad account you are in, you will find it somewhere in here and within these. It's typically in the shortcuts from most accounts I've seen it in. When you click in there, that is where the audience manager is, that allows you to kind of strategically build out all of the different audiences you want before the campaign setup. You can set up an audience during the campaign setup, excuse me. But what I find is when you do that, you're typically in the motion of setting up a campaign, and it can kind of derail the thought process a little bit. You might make mistakes and things like that. Typically, I find that if you take the step back to create them in the audience manager first, it can be a little bit more beneficial to you overall in the campaign setup structure, because you've thought about all your different data points at that point as well. So you're going, I can include this, exclude this, and tweak and change things around. So when you're selecting an audience that you have created in Audience Manager, you can just use the used saved audience feature here to select your audience that you have already pre-created for your campaigns. So these are some of the types of custom audiences that you can create in your Audience Manager. Now, as you can see here, they're kind of split into two sections: your sources and Facebook sources. So your sources, like your website, your app activity, customer list, and offline activity, they all correlate to things that happen not on Facebook. These are the types of audiences that are most heavily impacted by the iOS 14 changes. So website, this might be people who went to any page on your website, certain pages on your website, took certain actions on your website. Your customer list, this might be a list of email addresses that you have. It might be your email list. You might want to synchronize it with your email platform, be it MailChimp or ConvertKit or whatever email provider that you use to send out your mailing list. Same as website with your app activity, whether they have utilized it in some way, shape or form, what actions they took within the app. And offline activity as well is kind of more location based. You can synchronize this as well with your POS system in some circumstances too. But these are all your sources of data. And these are what people are opting out of being tracked from. So these can be more impacted by the iOS 14 changes, and it's audiences in here that are most likely to be reduced in size as a consequence of that. So you need to keep an eye closely on these audiences. In contrast, you have your Facebook sources, which can be really beneficial. Now, Facebook sources are on platform data. So this is data from within the Facebook ecosystem. So this is slightly different in the sense that these sources of data are not really impacted by the changes because they're not being tracked across different platforms. They're not being tracked as you go away from it because these happen within the platform. And what's interesting about these is that you can also leverage some of your organic successes into these campaigns as well as your shopping. So say, for example, you had a video that was performing really well, or you have an Instagram account that has some really engaged followers. You've been using lead forms and you have some high quality leads. Maybe you'd run events, maybe your Facebook page is doing well, shopping, all of these different options. You can create audiences based off it. So it might be anyone who's watched more than 75% of this video. I want to remarket to them to get them to the website and converting. So you can use these sources and they're really effective as well in terms of getting in front of the audience. These will become particularly more important as you see these more impacted, but you will have to kind of assess that yourself. A great way to kind of get an assessment of how much of your audience is actually on Apple devices is by going into your Google Analytics accounts and looking at your customer breakdown by device. You can see what kind of devices they're using. Typically, for most people, there is a good, healthy percentage that is Apple devices. But getting into the swing of understanding these different tactics now will benefit you going into 2022 and beyond as well, because Android is following suit of the Apple changes. So actually, all mobile devices will pretty soon be privacy first focused, and you need to start leveraging these different tactics earlier so that you can get into the swing of it pretty soon. I would recommend highly at this stage as well to be building as many leads as possible as well. If you don't have an email marketing list, really consider that so that you're building some of your own data and that you don't have to always lean on other points of data. I'm sure the platforms will come up with some better solutions to navigate around these, but for right now, these are the structures that we are working to. Once you have a custom audience created, regardless of what type it is, whether it's a website audience or your data source, we'll say, or if it's a Facebook source, you can create a lookalike audience based off that. Now, your lookalike audience is also going to be impacted if it is taken from a source that is impacted also. So just to bear that in mind when you're creating your lookalikes. That's not to say that they're ineffective now. It's just that they have been impacted now. So there is a slight difference there, and that impact can vary from business to business. So you can select your source, whether it's your pixel or if it's one of the custom audiences you have already created. You select your country or region that you're going to select. Different regions will create different audience sizes. So for example, I'm based here in Ireland, and a lookalike audience of 1% is about 33,000 people because of our population size. If I go to create a lookalike audience and base it in the US, the 1% lookalike could be up to over 2 million people because of the audience difference in terms of population sizes. So don't worry too much if it changes region by region. That is normal, and it's pinned back on just the volume of people in that region. But what you want to look at and worry about a little bit more is these percentages along. So these percentages essentially, as you go more and more towards the 10%, the less similar the audience is to the original source. So typically in 80% of campaigns that I've seen running, 1%, 2%, 3% kind of at a push typically tend to be the best performing lookalike audiences, although I have seen some people push that out further to create a really broad brand awareness campaign and things like that. But as a general rule of thumb for conversion focused audiences and things like that, keeping it on the tighter end of the lookalike is more beneficial. So it's more relevant to you. It's more relevant to the original source of data as well. So you want to keep a close eye on keeping it towards this side rather than broadening those audiences out. But again, make sure that your lookalike audiences are being based off sources of data that aren't heavily impacted, so that you get the best benefit out of those as well. There's also special ad audiences. These aren't relevant for the vast majority of people, but just in case you are in the space where it is credit, employment, and housing ads, Facebook has created this type of audience type to help enforce their policies against discriminatory practices in advertising and prevent discrimination based on demographic characteristics such as age, race, and gender. They do work in a similar way to lookalike audiences, with the exception of demographic data stripped from the options. They are of particular importance to credit, employment, and housing ads. So this is to ensure that where people are looking for a home, whether they're looking for a loan, that they're not discriminated on, and therefore those types of adverts, and if you're in those types of businesses, need to adhere to special ad audience types, and you will need to look into these just so you can see the types of data that are already stripped out of it. So it's largely the demographic based characteristics here that you want to keep an eye on. When it comes to demographic and psychographic based targeting, you can set this audience type up. This may look like the ad set setup, but actually this is from within the audience manager as well. And this is where you can create your kind of broad demographic, psychographic based targeting, where you're putting in an audience name, you're looking at the different regions, you're looking at the age brackets, you want to look at gender. You can also add locations in bulk, which is pretty handy. It doesn't work well in Ireland, unfortunately, because we don't have zip codes, but you can look at it from that perspective as well in the US. Gender, again, you can just select those if required. You can look at the different languages, and you can look at demographics, interests, and behaviors. These have quite a lot of information underneath them. There is kind of argument on how accurate they are, but typically people who match an interest in or a behavior of or a demographic of fall into these categories, and you can use those for targeting as well. Also, it's worth noting at this point the exclusion buttons, where you can create an audience and exclude people who have taken a certain action. And you can also use this audience to narrow down a previously created custom audience. So say, for example, you had created a custom audience saying anyone who has ever been to my website in the last 90 days, but I also want to make sure that I'm just targeting only women who have been to my website between X and X age who have an interest in. So you might have a audience that you want to narrow down further, that you can filter through this, or you can exclude anyone who's been to the website just to target only new people. So you can mix and match things within this audience structure and setup there as well. Audience insights as well is pretty interesting. This is an example from an account I work on where they sell multiple different crafting products. But you can see here the vast majority of their audience is in Dublin, followed by Cork, even though they're based in Cork, but Dublin is the capital and holds the vast majority of the population in this instance, so this wouldn't be unusual. But you can get a breakdown of kind of men, women, different demographical information. You can look through the content results, get a little bit of an overview. This kind of has changed recently, this audience insights tool, but you can still get a lot of information from it if you're looking at, okay, well, who has looked into this information already, who has kind of engaged with us, who's interacting with us, and you can kind of build some ideas for the future as well using this audience insights tool. You can also do geo-targeting to target an audience who is in a specific area. Now, this is really interesting, say, for example, if you are trying to promote at a conference, if you have just gone for a really important B2B meeting and in an office and you want to target that office afterwards with testimonial content around your business, you can use this for lots of different features. But essentially, again, this is leveraging the exclusion points within Facebook. So here you can see the little green option here, Cork City Council. And what I've done is made the blue circle here by using this drop pin feature, and you can select the building. And what Facebook will allow you to do is reduce the radius of this right down to 1 kilometer. You may see this in miles as well. And you can just reduce it down to the smallest size possible. And then what you can do is switch this to exclude. You can drop exclusion pins around the outside. And what happens is you start excluding off these little gaps that are in the circle that are outside what you want to target, and you end up with a very small target point here in the middle. So this allows you to target an extremely small area with an advert. This might be beneficial again for conferences, events and things like that you want to get in front of people who are attending. This particular feature is kind of a little bit finicky in the setup. As you can see, you have to kind of play around with it and drop the pins exactly, but it can be really beneficial to getting in front of a really tiny specific audience. The other thing that I would heavily note when you're using geo-targeting is to ensure that you are using an extremely small budget. I'm talking like $2, $3, because the audience size is so small within a tiny specific area like this that you could saturate it really quickly with anything larger in terms of budget, unless it was an extremely heavily populated, condensed area. But for the vast majority of purposes like conferences, events, car shows, whatever kind of little thing that you want to target in the middle of something, I would recommend a really small budget for this. You will hit the audience, but you just need to make sure that it's not just repeating that they're seeing it 10 times in the day. You want them to see it, but you don't want them to be bombarded with it either or annoy people. So this is another interesting thing that you can do within the audience manager, and that's share audiences. So you can collaborate with other businesses and share audiences back and forth. Now, if you've uploaded a custom list of email addresses, this does not share the email addresses with them. It just shares the encrypted audience. So you cannot see any information. You cannot download any information. You can just see the audience name and some information of what it is. But other than that, you aren't actually sharing any personally identifying information with anyone. So you can share audiences back and forth with people. There might be some restrictions regionally around this. For example, in Europe with GDPR, if you didn't have permission to use that list for marketing in the first place, that could be an issue. But so long as you're compliant with anything in your region, you can use this share feature to collaborate. And this can be a really interesting opportunity for businesses. Most of us think that only our competitors are going to have an audience similar enough to us to benefit from, but that's not necessarily true. So for example, I work with someone in the fitness space and also someone in the chefing and recipe space, And those two people have very different audience, or well, they have very similar audiences, but their businesses are very different. They're not competing, but their audiences overlap, and they're a perfect opportunity to collaborate there. So you can look at these opportunities to collaborate as opposed to anything else, and as opposed to compete, I guess, in some instances. But when you collaborate and share audiences, it can be really beneficial, especially if you're a startup or a newer business that you want to get in front of particular people that maybe someone else has access to. So you can use this sharing option to share audiences back and forth between ad accounts as well. When it comes to your audiences and your campaign structures, so when you select create campaign, this is what you are met with. And what you select here is going to impact how your audience performs. So it's very unusual to have an audience set up wrong. Typically, what actually happens is that the campaign structure is wrong. And over here on the left, what you'll see is your awareness campaign. This is an extremely low intent cold audience. When you have a medium intent audience, again, this is just a warm audience. And over here on the right hand side, when you're looking for conversions, that is a hot, high intent audience. You are very unlikely to get conversions if you set up an awareness campaign, select your audience, and run your adverts. If you set up a conversion campaign, in contrast, and you select the relevant audience and you run it for conversions, the same audience is going to convert in this instance and potentially not in this instance, or very little in the middle. Typically, vast majority of campaigns I set up are conversion focused because that's what people want. But in some instances, you might see some video view campaigns that you have a really nice video, and then you create an audience afterwards to say, okay, anyone who watched 75% of that gets moved into targeted for conversion. So some of these audiences can be leveraged as a little bit more top of funnel data to bring into the conversion focused campaign. And that's fine too if you have different goals and, like, for example, app installs and things like that. So you want to just consider these and make sure that whatever campaign you want, like, you will get what you pick essentially. Like, if you want traffic to your website, you are going to get traffic. Is it going to be high quality traffic? No, not as much as if you selected a conversion focused campaign and optimized it for landing page views on your website. So you have to consider these different structures and how they're going to convert for you. What's interesting about all of these different structures is that if I select conversions, as I mentioned there about the landing page views, if I select conversions, in the next step, when you're looking at your ad set, you have the opportunity to change the what your goal is essentially. So you can say, okay, I want conversions because I want a high intent audience, but I want landing page views because I want as much high quality traffic to my website as possible. This again may impact on the number of conversions you're getting, but again, it might help you with that goal. So you want to look at these and think about the different goals that you want with it. Again, with traffic, it'll auto default to link clicks. Link clicks are pretty useless. You want landing page views. You want people to actually hit your website. So again, I'd be going to traffic and then optimizing for landing page views. But again, it's you're still in the kind of medium intent side of things. So you have to kind of think about these structures really, really carefully when you're setting up your campaigns. Over here then, in your ad set, so once you have selected your campaign type and you've moved through and you've selected your audience, the next thing that you get the opportunity to choose is whether you want automatic or manual placements. And automatic placements just means that every single one of these boxes are ticked. Now, I should note that I don't have a up-to-date screen grab here. And there's actually an extra row under here now for Instagram Reels. So Instagram Reels is a placement option now as well. But placements are something that I urge you to think about when it comes to your advertising, because different placements have different results. I see most results come from the Facebook and Instagram feed for most people, but I have another account that I work on that runs an app, and actually the app and sites works really well, which typically works for nobody else. So you have to kind of think about your placements. What is your product and where do people hang out? So it's not like, okay, you can say people hang out on Facebook, but do your audience hang out in Facebook groups? Are they in the feed? Are they hanging out in the Instagram feed? Are they hanging out in Instagram stories? What do they do on the platform? Are they just looking through reels if they're a younger audience? There's a lot of different things that you need to think about. And the other thing that I often recommend to people as well is really considering things like the in-stream and in-article options. So for example, you know yourself when you're watching a video on Facebook and next thing the advert pops up in the middle. In that instance, it's kind of just annoying. You're just irritating someone who's trying to take another action. So in that instance, I typically turn that one off. In article as well, someone's just trying to read the article. And also it's very difficult to really decide what articles that you're going to be in. There is some brand safety features available in the business settings that you can use to decide what things you definitely don't want to be in. But it's hard to monitor everything out there, and new things crop up all the time. So think about your placements really heavily. Where do your audience hang out on these different platforms? Where are they most likely to convert? What is their behavior? Where are you going to annoy them? Where are you going to find them in the right place at the right time? Marketing is always going to be about finding the right people at the right place at the right time. And placements can be an important aspect of that as well. So just bear that in mind. However, if your marketing expert from Facebook calls you, they will 100% recommend automatic placements. And that's fine. I would recommend, if you do want to use automatic placements, let it run for a few weeks and then look at the breakdown of placements afterwards and see where you actually got conversions from and how much you were spending on wasted placements, and make the decision from there. Because typically at that point you'll see, okay, maybe I shouldn't have. Look at all the budget I'm wasting on all these placements that aren't converting for me. So think about it strategically there as well. The other thing that you really want to be thinking about when it comes to your audience is, are you split testing your copy and are you testing your creative? So as I mentioned before, it's very rarely that the audience is wrong. What you're probably getting wrong is either the campaign structure at the start or your creatives on the other side. So are you split testing your copy? Are you testing your creatives? Small changes can amount to big impacts. So recently completed a split test where we tested the word private chef instead of the word chef, and private chef versus just chef, and the click-through rate increased from 3 to 11%. And what was really interesting about that was the assumption we took away afterwards was that private chef sounded too expensive, whereas actually this was a perfectly affordable service. So moving from private chef to just chef actually made that small change actually made the click-through rate increase dramatically. So you really need to be thinking about your language. This is just a very small example. You can look at doing lots of different copy changes that make impact. Look at making sure that you have things set in the sense of call to action. So making sure that there's just one call to action. I did an audit recently where the person had 4 call to actions. They had used an influencer, and in the copy it said, would you like to watch the full influencer video? Would you like to sign up to our email address? If you click the button below, you can go through and look at the particular product. So too much going on. You can't give people choice if they're only making a split second decision. So you need to make sure that it's concise. If it's sign up, it's sign up, sign up, sign up, sign up everywhere. Just make sure that your call to action is clear and you're just using one per advert. Some mistakes that people make with their audiences here again: the incorrect campaign setup can often derail the audience performance. Your messaging not aligning or resonating with the audience as well. Your creative assets not responding with that audience. All of these things can impact your audience probably far more than the audience itself. So whatever audience you set, typically that will perform well so long as you structure your campaign correctly around it, in the sense of selecting the correct campaign type in terms of what you want from that audience, your goal from that audience, and also equally on the other side, sending that audience the correct message. So more often than not, the audience is probably fine. The placements, campaign type, and the messaging are what are causing most of the key issues. So if you're auditing your account at the moment and reviewing your audiences, and you're saying, well, this audience isn't performing, potentially it might be some of the structure around it, or else maybe the audience just doesn't align with your business either. So you just need to take that assessment as well when you're looking at these things. So it's just some key takeaways. Build your data and audience manager. I know some of the data is going to be impacted by iOS 14, but I would still keep adding it in there for at least for now. Ensure to align your campaigns with your goals for that audience and what level of intent you are seeking from the audience as well. And always be testing your creatives against your audience. Always be mixing things up. Creative fatigue is real. People become ad blind very, very quickly. If your frequency is high in your audiences, you really want to make sure that this is changed more regularly, or else you just are spending too much on the audience. But just really consider these as well. So thank you. That has been week 3 of the paid advertising course for Facebook. If you have any questions, as always, feel free to reach out to me at jen@growthuniversity.io or message me in Slack. Looking forward to seeing you next week.